What up, y'all? It's Joe Breezy once again. So I've decided I'm going to do a little something different this time. I'm going to bring to y'all a little piece I wrote back in 2004. I basically wrote this at work because I was bored. I used to have a job where I didn't have to do too much. I had to wait for chemicals to mix because I ran this chemical vat for a pretty big company. But you basically had to sit around and wait for everything to mix up. So there was a lot of downtime. So this chick actually, she liked the way I wrote stuff, and she kind of dared me to like freestyle a story, basically. So all of this was actually just written right off the top. I didn't pre-write it. I didn't have any idea of what I was going to do. I mean, I kind of came up with a vague one and just kind of went off the cuff from it. And it came out to be really, really good. A lot of people dug it. So everything that you're hearing, the way I wrote it, was, like I said, it was just straight up. I basically freestyled the whole thing. I originally put it out and wrote it on a... Back then, they didn't have, like, websites like they do now. They're basically like blog almost, but they're chat room style. And I wrote it for HoustonJuggalos.com. And basically each one of these chapters is what I wrote in between like cigarette breaks at work. So I'd write a chapter, go take a smoke, come back, write another chapter. And I think it took me a total of 2 days. And it was pretty cool, man. I had a lot of fun with it. A lot of people dug it, like I said. And we're going to get into it today. Or tonight. However long it takes me. This is also not going live. I'm actually playing with some video editing software. Because I haven't read this story in a long time. So if I mess up, I'm going to have to restart and retake over. And then I'm going to put all these clips together to actually make it one seemingly seamless project. Yeah. So I guess without further ado, let's get into it. This story is called Fat Camp, A Tale of Twisted Terror. Written by Joe Breezy. Date of completion 9/18/04. So, let's get into Fat Camp, A Tale of Twisted Terror. Chapter 1. It was the summer of 8th grade, just before my freshman year, when my parents in all their wisdom decided to send me to camp. No, I'm not talking about band camp. I'm talking about, yep, you guessed it, fat camp. It seems my doctor gave this advice to my parents after my last physical. Needless to say, I was not overwhelmed to hear this news. For fat camp is something that is not considered cool amongst peers, let alone female peers. But it wasn't like I was having much luck in that department anyway. Taking into account I was a good 100 pounds overweight. Let's face it, I was more ridiculed than anything when it came to the opposite sex. The camp was called Camp Slim Juana. A clever play on words, no doubt. It was a nice place, set miles off into the dark forest of the Northwest Valley, right outside of a small town called Rollingbrook, a quick drive from where I grew up. It had beautiful vegetation and many lakes surrounding the small camp. It was abundant with wildlife of all sorts. When I first arrived, friends were not easy to come by. Everyone had been there before, clustered in their own groups, and the new kids, such as myself, mainly stayed in isolation, having never been offered a welcoming gesture by their fellow campmates who looked down their nose at the newcomers. This was of no concern to me, as I am a juggalo. Rejection and being ignored is something I've had to deal with for quite some time. There were a few kids who happened to notice my Hatchet Man charm. Unfortunately, the response was not a positive one. After the nurse patched my wound, she promptly sent me to the camp director's office. He discussed with me how he did not like the fact that I was only there one day, and already gotten into a fight with some of the older kids. The way I saw it, jumped was more the appropriate term. As well, he discussed his distaste in the music that I find so appealing. I believe his words were, "those fucking rapping clowns." He also gave me strong advice not to let him see me slipping again, or outhouse duty would be a regular part of my roster for the next 2 remaining months. Little did I know that the director and the youths that had gotten the best of me were the least of my worries. For something was there at that camp. Something evil. Something that made all the bullshit in the world seem small and trivial. Had I known the horrors that would befall upon that place at that moment in time, I still would have gone, due to the simple fact that I wouldn't have been able to comprehend such terror and taken it for a false. But I soon found out that imagination is extreme. But when the mind wraps itself around an emotional onslaught such as this, reality dwindles, and everything that was a foundation in your sanity is dissolved in a blink of an eye. And getting that sanity back is a long and treacherous road. Chapter 2. A few weeks had gone by and things were not getting any easier. Nightly scuffles with the older kids were becoming more routine, and avoiding the staff was becoming more difficult, considering I had to hide most of my face due to the lashings I was being subjected to. I did, however, find one friend. His name was Mike. Mike wasn't a juggalo, but he was a good guy. He would tell me about his hometown and the escapades him and his brother would get into. He was a jolly soul, though it had been my experience that most overweight individuals are. We spent most of our time trying to learn the camp as best we could, for we knew that any system could be worked to our advantage, and once that task was completed, we could reap whatever small and insignificant benefits we possibly could. After all, there wasn't much to look forward to unless you fancied PE at the butt crack of dawn, and to me that wasn't much motivation to stay on the straight and narrow. One evening, the older kids, we started calling them the gobble-gangers, because all they did was gang up on the new kids and eat their desserts, like fruit cocktail, pear slices, and things of that nature. Anyway, one day they came up to me and Mike while we were exploring an off-the-limits and very eerie section of the woods known as the Witch's Room. They asked what we were doing in the restricted area, and we refused to even utter a word. For this time, there was only 3 of them, opposed to the clique of 5 that they usually rolled in. Once the gobble-gangers saw that we were not about to back down, the fight was on. Up until that day, I'd never fought with the intensity and determination as I did at that particular moment. Soon, we had the upper hand, wailing as hard as we could on those punks who had made the first few weeks a living hell. The big one's name was David. He, in fact, fell the hardest, holding with both hands a bloody and broken nose, while falling to the ground with agony in his face, and hot tears rolling down his plump cheeks. After that instantaneous moment, fear registered in the minds of the other 2 goons, and they quickly retreated, running for the camp and leaving their fallen comrade to our mercy. As David lay in the dirt, defeat swept over his being like a slow morning breeze. He soon realized his position and was willing to talk. "Where do you get all those snacks I see you stuffing your face with?" screamed Mike, with a confidence I'd never heard in him before. With a broken cry, he explained to us how him and the others found a way to sneak into the counselor's food pantry and steal enough junk food to satisfy him and the others that knew about this caloric gold mine. After hearing this, with not so much as a peep, Mike and I were devising a most devious moonlight robbery. This plan, although brilliant, would lead to a chain of events that would haunt me still to this day. Chapter 3. It was just 1 week until the 17th annual Camp Slimwana Masquerade Ball. Everybody was busy creating their costumes and such for an evening of sugar-free punch and tofu rolls. I remember one of the counselors asking me, Mike, why we weren't making any costumes as of yet. I believe my reply was something along the lines of, because we're just going to be scrubby, fat, mass-murdering clowns. Needless to say, her reaction was less than flattering. She quickly pulled out her clipboard, jotted something down, and said in a shrill tone, well, it looks like you two are off the list for the NutraSweet peach cobbler we're having this weekend. Mike and me just looked at each other, for we knew what was to be done. After we were done with them, NutraSweet would be the only sweets they'd be partaking in. The Gobblegangers, on the other hand, were moving in slowly but surely. Having been defeated, David was more hostile and abusive towards the other kids than I had previously witnessed. It seemed as though he was taking his defeat out on everyone around him, even his fellow food thugs. Time was of the essence. Pressures were rising to the breaking point, and something had to give. Everybody had felt it at the time, I'm sure of it. The counselors were growing more and more impatient with the fat little shits who constantly bitched about going home. The Gobblegangers were constantly plotting on their revenge. And us, well, let's just say we were ecstatic to put our plan into effect. The eve of the ball had arrived. Distancing ourselves from the others was essential. The less they saw of us, the less they thought about us. Or so we thought. Mike and I climbed into our bunks and lay silent, thinking about the night to come, when sleep finally crept in, like a warm blanket placed over you in the dead of a night by a loving soul. I remember next a blinding light. It was fast and quick, and then nothingness. I awoke outside, trying to catch any sign of where I might have been, and began to look around, when a Doc Martin ever so violently collided with my jaw. "Wake up, bitch," said one of the flabby fivesome. "Now you're going to pay for what you did to me," said a half-crazed David who was holding a Louisville Slugger he stole from the recreational room. I looked around for Mike, but he was nowhere to be seen. Knowing this, David said with a shaken voice, "Your friend's not here, but don't worry, we have him in a safe place. I guess you say he's tied up at the moment." Realizing that David wasn't the sharp hatchet in the dresser drawer, I soon grasped the fact that the pun was in fact intended. Looking at my surroundings, I came to the realization I was in the middle of the witch's room. This disturbed me, and I'll tell you why. Number one, it was night out, and the last couple weeks the counselor has been telling their renditions of the witch's room and all the strange things that happened in that vicinity. I, for one, being a juggalo, was and still am very weary of the beyond, because I know the netherworld is just a Fago's toss from our reality. And number two, I had this behemoth standing over me with a solid black baseball bat, and I know if he used it, no one would hear me, no matter how loud of a scream I may have let out. At that same instant, I heard something rustling in the leaves about 20 or so feet from where the beating of my life and possibly death was about to take place. "Go check it out," said David in a half-ordering, half-startled tone to one of his obese cronies. "You don't fucking move a muscle," he shrieked to me as he pointed his fat little digit towards the tip of my nose. Then from out of the foliage a dull thud echoed through the night, and it was followed by a quick gasp. David turned around only to confront whatever it was that was out there. In a flash, he too hit the ground, with a small blood trail running from his oversized cranium. As I looked forward, my eyes started to focus more clearly. I saw a figure attacking the other boys, and they were doing their best to escape whatever it was. But just as I was at the point of relieving myself from absolute terror, I heard a voice shout, "You didn't tie me up like you should have, you sons of bitches." With an utter sigh of relief, I managed to speak. "Mike, help me loose, will you?" I got up on my feet, and my head was pounding from whatever they hit me with while I was sleeping and my back molar had fell between my cheek and gum. I quickly spit it out onto the forest floor. We rolled over David's gargantuan body so he was facing the dark blue moonlit sky. We decided to leave him there as a lesson, and then maybe by the morning he'd think twice about attempting revenge on us again. We snuck back to our bunks. Mike still carried the big stick he used to fend off the gobblegangers, and I rested at ease with my new Louisville. Sleep was one thing we needed, for tomorrow is going to be a day we would never forget. Tune in later for the exciting and thrilling Chapter 4. Same fat time, same fat channel. This had to apparently been one of the break in the day, or probably at the end of the day at work. So that's where that came in. Chapter 4. As I awoke the next morning, there was commotion all over the camp. I quickly looked over at Mike, and his bunk was empty. I jumped out of bed, put my slugger in my footlocker, and went outside. "Have you seen David?" One of the counselors asked. "No, I just woke up," I replied, as I went over last night's events in my still shaking head. "Why, is something wrong?" In which she gave no reply. Amongst all the commotion, I headed for a tool shed that was outside of camp where Mike and me blew what little dank I had when we got to this wretched hellhole. "Hey, I thought you might be here," I explained. He said nothing. I could tell he was still in mental shock from the night before. "Man, I'm sick of those fuckers," he cried. "I just want to let loose on all of them like a night of the 44. With a smirk, I told him how I'd felt the same way, and also that he needed to ask me if he was going to borrow my Hell's Pit CD again. He smiled. "So you're starting to hear the message of the carnival, huh?" I asked. "That's good, Ninja, but remember, don't take it literally. You don't want to end up like that one guy I was telling you about who killed his caseworker, do you? You can't get into Shangri-La that way, man." "Yeah, I know. I just needed to vent a little." I knew exactly where he was coming from. I too had been there many times before. "Fuck it, man. Let's go get some breakfast and discuss our plans for the night." As we sat there eating our sugarless bowl of cornflakes, we discussed all the ninja tactics that we were going to pull for this tasty heist. As dark began to settle, an odd wind set in, dropping the temperature some 20 degrees. The director stated over the loudspeaker that a meeting was to be held in the cafeteria. That's when he informed us that David couldn't take camp any longer and had ran away. When those words left his lips, our eyes locked with the remaining gobblegangers. Their eyes were filled with uncertainty and terror. I put my finger to my lips ever so slightly to show them that their silence was the only thing that would keep them from the same demise as their piggish friend. Of course, I was bluffing. I had no idea what had happened to David. Now, I was actually starting to assume that maybe he did run away. After the assembly, we all went to prepare for the ball. All that is except us who were planning our ultimate scheme. My senses were sharp, my adrenaline was kicking in, my stomach was aflutter. I needed chocolate. As soon as the masquerade began, we snuck out the bathroom window, made our way into the lobby. The halls were dark, and there was an unsettling eeriness about that place that I just couldn't put my finger on. "Okay, you wait here, Mike. If anyone comes this way, you know the signal," I whispered. When I made it out to the pantry, I was overwhelmed by its size. They could have put years' worth of food in there, easy. I reached on the top of the gargoyle statue just like David had described to us, and felt a key. Astonished that it actually worked, I almost couldn't contain myself. I started to dance silently in joy, quietly singing to myself, "Magic, magic, ninja, what? Magic, magic, ninja, what?" I quickly gathered myself and pulled the can of WD-40 out of my backpack. I sprayed the hinges so no noise would come off the opening of the door. I was inside. Frozen for a second, I had to shake it off. There were ho-hos, snack cakes, candy bars, even snowballs. I started throwing them in my bag as fast as my fat body would move. It only took a couple of minutes before my snack had reached My second reached its load-bearing capacity. Not being able to squeeze another item in, I opened a package of brownies and quickly started feeding my sweet tooth. As I chowed down, I thought of everything that summer had dealt me. And at that point in time, it was all worth it. That is until I turned around. There were two bright, red, glowing eyes staring back at me. They were huge, at least 2 or 3 times the size of normal human eyes. All of a sudden, my nostrils detected a repugnant odor. Then it screamed. It was the most horrible sound I had ever heard. I could feel the hot breath escaping from the creature's mouth. All of a sudden, my mind registered what was happening. I couldn't scream, I couldn't blink, I couldn't even feel. With some sheer grace of luck, I flinched, and from that flinch, I regained my senses. I sprang into an hysterical bolt, grabbed the edges of the shelf, and pulled them down, trying to make them fall on the creature, but it was to no avail. With a lightning-fast jump, he perched upside down on the ceiling. I looked overhead, and I saw those huge red eyes. God, I'll never forget those eyes. They were the eyes of hell. I made my move, and I leaped out the pantry as fast as I possibly could. I ran through the hall. I didn't hear him on my trail, but I wasn't waiting to look back. I almost made it to the lookout post where Mike was, but I approached it, and I couldn't see him anywhere. I slipped, falling to the ground, and quickly arose to find myself wet, and there was an unmistakable smell all around me. I looked at my hands. Blood. I panicked frantically. I tried to run again, but then something hit my head, knocking me once again to the ground. I looked above me to see a young boy hanging upside down from the horizontal support beam. Mike was dead. I gathered in that split second that I must have bumped into his head. He had an incision running long ways down his body from his lower stomach all the way down to his third chin. I was awe-stricken in terror, and then I heard it scream again. Chapter 5. There I was, bound with fright. My mind lapsed into what was to be my next move. Quickly I sprang to my feet. I ran down the trail that led to the assembly room in which the ball was taking place. As I ran towards the floodlights in the distance, I felt the flutter in the wind, and before I could gasp another breath, I was snatched up, throat first, by this foul and hideous demon. It looked closely, examining my face with a thoughtful process. Then it spoke to me. But as I tell you this, I want no inaccuracies to the fact that when this demon spoke, it spoke with its eyes. The eyes of 1,000 years of hell seemed to open up to me and channel thoughts directly to my already bewildered mind. It questioned me with all the tongues known to man as to why I had the mark. At the time, I had no idea what it was referring to. Now I understand all too well. With the utmost fear, I was still, when in that moment I heard a voice. Out of nowhere, the voice boomed with intensity. "Demon, let him go." It thundered. With these words were spoke, the demon shrilled loudly into the night sky. It was the most horrifically painful sound I could ever have fathomed. He dropped me to the ground and flew straight up in the air like a screaming bottle rocket. I quickly sprang to my feet when I realized my head was bleeding quite badly. The reason for my injury wonders me to this day. I took my great Malenko shirt off and quickly wrapped it around my head. Of course, I need not tell you that I had another shirt under it, for a fat kid never goes bare-skinned to the world. Wiping the blood from my eyes, I started to run for the others, as to warn them about the evil that had fallen upon the camp. On the way to the assembly room, I passed by our sleeping quarters, where I proceeded to grab my Louisville. Granted, I realized any damage I could possibly do with this instrument would be minimal. Still, just having it by my side gave me comfort. I stopped and listened. In the dark, I just fell silent, listening to the outside noises. But in this case, it was more like lack thereof. On a summer night such as this, crickets, locusts, and other noisemakers of the night should have been overwhelmingly abundant. However, my heartbeat was the only sound audible. In haste, I grabbed my psychopathic gym bag and started throwing my clothes and what few personal possessions I could into the bag. Anxiety was at its peak. My heart was racing. My appendages were numb with adrenaline. I put the bag over my shoulder, sported my best Sammy Sosa batting pose, and kicked the front door open. Outside, I could feel the cool breeze slap my face with an awakening sting. I headed once again for the assembly room. That's when I heard something in the bushes. I walked with stealth. I walked with the stealth of a ninja towards the bush, raised the bat over my head and swung downward with a devastating blow. Flying out of the bush was nothing more than a raccoon that rapidly escaped up a nearby tree. "Motherfucker!" I yelped, startled half to death. At that exact moment, from the tree in which the raccoons take shelter, something flew at me, grazing my shoulder. I quickly looked down to identify the object. It was the raccoon, but his head, feet, and tail were all roughly torn from the body. The chase was on. I'll admit it. I wasn't the most agile person in the world. I mean, after all, I was in fat camp. But with the mixture of fear and adrenaline, I took off with the speed of a cheetah. A cheetah that was 100 pounds overweight, but a cheetah nonetheless. It was to no avail. The demon swooped down on me with undying rage and tackled me to the ground, pinned me on my back, and it stared down at me with a hating ooze from its aura. That's when the voice spoke once again. "Demon, let him go." As the demon turned, I grabbed my hatchet man charm in my fist and thrust it into his evil eye. Its gasp on me loosened almost instantly. The demon cried out loudly, lashing violently back and forth. I started to crawl away from its giant bat-like frame. After my feet were under me, I ran to the corner of the trail, only to see the assembly room's doors staring back at me like a beacon of hope. I opened the doors. Chapter 6. As the double doors cracked open, I felt the chill of the air conditioning. I could hear the music playing for all the large individuals who should have felt like they were light as air, dancing and sipping on their sugar-free punch, cookies, and granola snack bars. "Help! Somebody please help me!" I pleaded as I ran to where the party was commencing. No one was there. I looked around in bewilderment, trying to sum the thoughts in my head, when my sense of smell awoke and registered a warning in my brain. Blood and raw meat was the odor that filled my nostrils. Over to the right of the room, I noticed a black tarp that looked as though it was part of the decorations lying on the floor. Something was under it. In pure and utter terror, I grabbed the corner of the tarp, afraid as to what might be under there. I jerked the cover off as fast as I could. What I saw haunts me to this very moment. There were about 20 or so bodies under there. When I say bodies, I use the term loosely because, to my horror, my eyes were filled with the image of 20 or so torsos, and nothing more. All of them were deprived of their heads, feet, and arms, as well as not one single drop of blood anywhere, not even on what should have been the bloody nubs themselves. I stumbled backwards in a drunken fashion. Shock was beginning to take hold. Then it hit me. I was alone. My stomach turned, tunnel vision creeping through my sight. I heard a slow echo that got faster and faster. All of a sudden I felt cold. I could no longer hold my composure. I fell flat on my back. Unconsciousness swept over me. I awoke first hearing some mainstream hip-hop. I yelled out to my little brother to shut it off while reminding him of my hate for the shit they refer to as Top 40. Getting steadily frustrated with him, I opened my eyes to quickly school him on the ways of the underground. When they focused, I saw meaty strings of flesh strewn in the corner to corner, hanging from the ceiling. The horror was real, and I was still alone. Soon I found out the rest of the entrails, heads, and limbs were all lined up out on the tables. They were using them for snacks and punch, all set out like some macabre buffet. The punch bowls were filled to their brim with blood. Body parts were set in neat individual piles, and the music played on. I observed my surroundings. I happened to notice a badge in on one of the torsos. It was a badge of none other than Jimmy Bowles, the camp director. I reached into his inside pocket of his vest, pulled out a set of keys and some loose cash. I had one thought brewing in my fragile eggshell of a mind. Find his car, and get the fuck out of this horrid hellhole they call Fat Camp. I sprinted for the doors to make my way to the parking lot. Not a sound was in the air. Fear once again took control. I frantically ran for the parking lot. I was unsure as which car was his, but there were only a few to choose from, seeing there was only 6 counselors at the facility. I was trying all 17 keys on the key ring with no luck. After my third car, I heard a sound. It was whooshing coming directly from behind me. I dropped as fast as I could when straight above me, the demon slammed into the side of the car door. The creature fell atop me with the weight. It was bone crushing. With its weight, it was bone crushing. Yeah. At that moment, a very strange and funny thing happened. In the twinkle of an eye, for an instant, I wondered, is this what it's like for a fat girl to get on top? Not having had sex yet, combined with the fact that I found girls of extreme size sexy, was probably the spawn of such an off-the-wall thought. But before I could even ponder that sliver of a thought any longer, I noticed my body was moving by reaction. I was already in the process of kicking the creature off me. I ran for the last car. This one had to be it. Amazingly, the first key I put into the lock worked. I felt the lock give way. My heart dropped with relief. I opened the door and I got in. As I turned the key, the engine turned over slowly, almost started and then failed. I laid my head on the steering wheel and called out to the carnival for help. I turned the key again. The engine came to life with a roar. As I was backing up, I looked out the back window. The demon laid on the pavement motionless. I threw the car into drive and took one last glance into the rear view. It sat straight up and beamed his one red eye right at mine. Terror-stricken, I stomped on the gas. I flew by a few bends in the road when I saw its shadow in the moonlight, leading the vehicle on the dirt road ahead. It was like a dragon when it came to its wings and claws, but more like a bat when it came to the shape of its head. In falling, it was a long tail, maybe 10 feet or so, and it had a spear-like shape at the end of it. I was in marvel at what I was witnessing. What in the hell is this thing, I pondered. Then the shadow faded like a sunset on the horizon. Out of nowhere, the roof of my car came to life with a devastating slam. The car shook, almost flying off the narrow path. Then out of nowhere, the back windshield shattered. The long whip-like tail of the demon started thrashing inside the car, breaking windows and slapping me in the process. One of the blows hit my elbow and the car swerved. I flew off the road and quickly started gliding down the steep slope, taking out bushes and small trees in my way. I came to, the horn was wailing. The front end of the car was wrapped around a giant oak tree and the demon was nowhere in sight. I looked around to see if I might be able to recognize my surroundings. I did. I was in the middle of the witch's room. The 7th and final chapter. Frantic, I knew I was doomed. It was just a matter of time. The demon was nowhere to be seen. I picked up my bat off the floorboard of the car and I waited. However, I did not wait long. Swooping straight down on me, the demon slashed at me with his sinister claws. Simultaneously, I swung with all my might, and I hit him with my bat, but the blow was less than favorable on my account. Feeling my flesh ripped, I looked down at my stomach. Blood was flowing like a small creekside waterfall. I stumbled, almost losing my balance. I regained my foothold. Time was rapidly running out. A couple more wounds like this and I was a goner. Then when out of the night sky the demon snatched me up by my shoulders and carried me straight up in the air about 20 feet or so. Then he paused, gave me a delectably evil grin and dropped me. My legs snapped on impact. I lied there, silenced, hurt, confused, and at the point of giving up. The demon flew straight back down and glided over so softly until he perched atop my chest. You, he gleamed. You are the one I have chosen, for you bear the mark. I replied with nothing. The game was over. I'd been defeated. Many have come and gone, but in you I see a great many things. You're not like the others, are you? What others, I thought. The most hypocrites and evil little shits. I see in you no bigotry, no hatred, no spite. Yet most that carry qualities such as this only wear it on their sleeve, and yet do not fulfill in action what they preach to others. Why does that matter, I questioned. Because, he answered, it's very rare I get to dine on a soul such as yours. I will truly be, it will truly be, I almost went out of character. It will truly be a delicacy I shall enjoy for many moons to come. Fear overwhelmed every fiber in my being, and in an instant his snake-like tail thrust over his shoulder, slamming deep into the caverns of my beating heart. He loomed overhead as I felt my life giving way. The demon laughed with the most sinister look upon his face. Shangri-La was the only thing I could hope for. Then it happened. A great light shone down on us from an immaculate sky and made a glow of everything around us. Then the voice boomed down from the heavens. He is my property, demon. He belongs to the carnival and no other. Then a radiant beam of concentrated fire shot down from the sky, striking the demon's back. A squeal of agony escaped his mouth. Then his voice spoke again. Demon, for too long you have had control of this unsacred ground, but the time has come, I don't know why I sounded dark there, has come for you to vanquish your vanquish, and the ground shall inherit a new spirit, a new one of life, neither good nor evil, and as well I recount and draw back all the souls in which you fed on this full moon. Then all of a sudden I was surrounded by walking spirits. All were kids and counselors from the camp. Though they did not look like themselves, you still could recollect who they were. The first to ascend was David. This took me by the throat, for I quickly realized he was the first to meet his demise. That lonely night, Mike and me left him in the mercy of the witch's room. Many more passed, each vaporizing as they levitated high above. Then I saw him. It was Mike. As he walked by me, he said not a word, but for a moment in time he looked at me with a humble smile on his face and nodded as if to say goodbye. Tears filled my eyes. Why me? Why did I have to endure such a twisted fate? After Mike, there were no more souls left. Then a loud trumpet sounded, and the demon cowered in terror, covering its ears with its razor-like claws. His tail jerked out of my chest with the quickness. My body jerked with the removal, and blood shot from my mouth, hitting the demon square in the face. Smoke started to arise from his freshly wet facial features. Then it started to boil, as if it were going to explode. I, on the other hand, felt nothing. No pain, no fear, not even the grass I lay on top of. The face of the horrid creature began to melt and run down its rough animal-like cheeks. A giant hole opened in the ground. A smell of brimstone hit my senses. Sound of horrific torture rang off into the otherwise quiet night. The light that embraced us lifted the demon. It was suspended over the wretched window to hell, and with one last high-pitched scream, it was dropped in the hole and closed without a mortal trace. The night was silent, and I was alive. I looked down to see what was my wound, and saw nothing. I was spared. I woke in the hospital a few days later. I investigated myself. I found I was bound to the bed with a shiny silver pair of handcuffs. The police said I was just being contained for questioning. Now it has been 30 years since that day, and I write this tale to you from a prison cell. They accused me of the murders. It was known as the Slimwana slayings. I'm sure you've read about them. I mean, really, who hasn't? It was the bloodiest mass murder in history. It seemed that I lost my mind that dreadful day and took the lives of all the people there, or so they would have you believe. At the trial, there were many pieces of evidence to prove that the prosecutor's theory. I never told them about the demon or the voice. I saw no reason to. I mean, who would really believe me? That is until now. You are the ones in whom I trust to believe me. You who reads this right now. You, my fellow juggalos. I'm writing this for hope that maybe one day, when you share this story with another, it will portray me as a soldier of the carnival, and not an evil as which they see me. If they only knew the true face of evil, as I've seen it. For those who falsely judge me, they will soon enough. The end. Or is it? Yeah. Man, I haven't read that thing. I don't know how long. Well, anyway, did a little postal author's note, I guess, so that's how this goes. I would like to thank all of you who took your time to read this story. It started small with no direction, but soon it began to take shape. I feel as though a piece of me is in this saga somewhere, and a piece of the people who make my world go around as well. Most of all, though, I thank God for giving me the talent and imagination to make something such as this come to life the way it has for me. This story is dedicated to the family. Much motherfucking family love. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed it. That was Fat Kemp, a tale of twisted terror. Like I said, it was just a fun little story. I thought I'd share it with y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed. I'm not really a great narrator, and I was planning on doing it like piece by piece, but you know, I just kind of said F it, you know, like wait, like what I'm getting at is, say I messed up a word or something, I was going to start the whole chapter over. That way it's flawless, and you know, but let's face it, I'm not a professional audiobook guy, so I just decided to keep running with it instead of doing 20 takes. I think the first chapter, I think I did like 12 takes. And the second one, I think I did like 5 or 8. And then I just stopped trying to be a perfectionist about it and just shoot from the hip. And so, you know, it's more organic that way. And it was a story. And that's how stories are told, you know. I wasn't just reading y'all a book to read y'all a book to read y'all a book, you know. Or a story, you know, whatever. You know, a page by a letter by a word by a page. But I hope y'all enjoyed. That was a little story time with Joe Breezy. I got a couple more little pieces I've wrote since then. A lot of them aren't completed, but maybe, who knows, maybe it'll inspire me to get them finished and get them knocked out if y'all are digging them. You know, let me know what y'all think, even if it sucked. Well, actually, no, if it sucked and you don't like it and thought I sounded